a case of wine from your favorite BC winery, you can do it from some places in Canada, but not in others. In fact, there are a lot of little known and some well-known trade barriers out there on goods and services. And there are growing calls now to bring down those barriers, or at least make an attempt to do that. One of those voices is Warren Steinley. He's the Conservative MP for Regina-Lewvan. He is also the Shadow Minister for Economic Development and Internal Trade. And Warren joins us on the program. Warren, welcome.
Thank you very much, Costa. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you.
If not in person, over Zoom.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the reality we face these days. I want to ask you about trade barriers in this country. I mean, that's been a topic, and there have been a lot said about that over the years, but what's new about that that causes you to raise this concern today?
You know, there's been a lot of conversations around internal trade recently, basically because of the pandemic. And we know there's more uncertainty now with trade and exports around the world. And it's a time for us to really take a look internally on some of the little changes that we can make that opens up our economy, grows our economy, and mostly helps us recover economically after we get through this pandemic.
Well, I mentioned in the introduction, ordering wine, and there are different rules and regulations across the country on that. But what are some examples that where there are trade barriers up that affect us here in Canada?
So I can have a couple examples. One, your example of wine is fantastic. One reason is I seconded a private member's bill by MP Conservative Dan Elvis, and he's wants to change the Canada Post Act, where it allows Canada Post to deliver beer, wine, and spirits across the country. So it's a change that we can implement through the Canada Post Act that will open up the wine markets to Canadians across the country. And it's a very easy change, and I think we're getting a lot of support across party lines. And the second example I could give, snow beef is a big thing in Saskatchewan right now. Ian Crosby, who is a friend of mine, is crossbreeding Wagyu beef with Holstein right in Caronport, Saskatchewan. And he did a CTV morning show with Ben Mulroney talking about how we can get a meat inspection in Saskatchewan, which is good for Saskatchewan residents, but then Ian cannot sell that beef to Alberta or Manitoba or anyone in Ontario that wants some great beef because of red tape and barriers, because that inspection isn't good enough for the rest of Canada, just in Saskatchewan.
Wait a minute, I can buy New Zealand lamb chops at Costco, and I can't get snow beef from Saskatchewan in Ontario. That seems a bit odd, but so what?
Yep,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I said it is a bit odd, and that's something that we should look at, making sure we can really have great Canadian products, and we shouldn't have little internal trade barrier tariffs or a little red tape that holds us up.
But as you know, in any kind of trade agreements, if you want to call it, here in Canada, there are winners and losers. I mean, what would happen to some Saskatchewan businesses if there was total free trade and rules and regulations in competing against bigger firms, say in Ontario or from Quebec?
Yeah, and that's a conversation I remember early on when Premier Wall first came into form government with the Saskatchewan Party, when we were talking about the New West Partnership and some of those agreements we were going to make, either with regards to labor mobility or increased trade freedom between some of the Western provinces. And we've seen a lot of benefits from that. Obviously, we are going to see some businesses that at the start possibly have some difficulties, but I'm for one believe that if we open up free trade, especially in Canada, and we have more opportunities from province to province, in the end, we're all going to benefit. And there's a few numbers out, one from the IMF that talks about how much money we're leaving on the table with internal trade barriers. It says close to $500 billion in Saskatchewan if we cannot get some of these trade barriers reduced. And I think that's something that could help the whole population on a whole and put more money into people's pockets.
You were an MLA in Saskatchewan, for those who don't know. So you've been in provincial politics, now you're in federal, but you know the conversations that go across the table provincially. What appetite would there really be in Quebec, for example, to stop huge subsidies for the milk and dairy, say, industry there? I mean, you're not going to get reelected if you do that. So what kind of guts do politicians have to make this first move to bring down these barriers when they know they could lose votes?
That's a good question, Costa. And I really believe that throughout this pandemic, Canadians are now looking more and more. There's a bigger push to help out local Canadian companies and shop, if not local, provincially, local Canadianly. And I think there's an opportunity for us to really come together as a country and support one another. And out of this pandemic, I can see the economic recovery being faster and stronger if you look at some of these barriers. You're right, there are going to be some provinces that have some aversion to doing this, but it also can be a conversation that it can be stakeholder driven as well. There are businesses, you can listen to business leaders across the country saying these are some things that need to be done. The Canadian Business Council, the Canadian Chambers of Commerce, they've all talked about what we could do and how we could reduce some internal trade barriers that increases our GDP. We really got to look at and focus on growing our GDP, growing the pie, and helping out businesses across our country.
Well, we'll see how that unfolds. It sounds like it's going to be a long conversation, but it's certainly worth having. Warren, thank you very much for joining me here tonight.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Costa. And one great thing about the Zoom meetings right now is we're also seeing the first inauguration of Colin Poular as a 135th chamber chair. So we're able to do both at the same time this evening.
That's multitasking. Thanks so much and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Take care.